Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a few moments. I'm going to take a moment to read the image description of the slides that you all should be seeing. The first slide is gradient purple background behind a red circle with black text that reads, "The WRC presents Creating Feminist Futures, a conversation on Black feminism with Ebony Oldham and Naima Lowe, 10/13/2020, 5:30 to 7 p.m. PST on Zoom. Register at bit.ly/CFF Series 2 at PSU_WRC. Bordering the bottom of the image are abstract triangle designs in black and light purple. Also on this image are a circle image of Ebony smiling in front of a bush of pink flowers and red text in a black box reading Ebony Oldham, she, they. At the bottom of the image in the beginning is Ebony's bio. Also featured is an image of Naima, who is our other speaker. The second image is a group of folks wearing a variety of clothes and hairstyles with arms around each other's shoulders as viewed from behind. This image is a flyer for the Trans Women's Community Project, formerly the Trans Women's Affinity Group. It reads that it is returning for fall term. Join the virtual gathering space every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. PST. Starts next Thursday, October 8th, which has already passed. Trans Women Community Gathering centered the lived experiences of trans women and trans femme students at PSU. Come share your experiences, build community, and celebrate trans bodies and history through activities, storytelling, and dialogue. Email wrc@pdx.edu to get on the list. The third image, bird's eye view of silhouettes of folks gathered around a table with food. Yellow background, black images and lettering. The Feminist of Color Community Project, formerly Feminist of Color Collective, is returning for fall term. Join the virtual gathering space every Wednesday from 3 to 4:30 p.m., weekly starting Wednesday, October 7th. Gather with other PSU students this fall in a space that centers the lived experiences of feminists of color through storytelling, dialogue, and community. Email wrc@pdx.edu to get on the list, or DM us your email address. Our fourth slide is an image of an Indigenous person with their legs bent back beneath them and sitting back on their feet. They have a small child on their back in a striped wrap. Above and below this person are the words Indigenous Feminism. Behind the words and image are light lavender and green stripes. At the base of the image reads, Rise, Radical Indigenous Survivance and Empowerment. This is a flyer for our next conversation in the series. This reads, Upcoming Creating Feminist Futures Conversation Series, Land Back and Indigenous Feminism, also Trans Liberatory Feminism. More soon. Our last slide is a gold banner in front of a light purple background that reads, PSU Sexual and Relationship Violence Response Program. Below reads, serve students of all genders who have experienced sexual assault, sexual harassment, dating or domestic violence, and stalking by providing a safe, non-judgmental, pressure-free space, knowledge and supporting regarding reporting options, assistance with safety planning, assistance in requesting academic support, assistance requesting permanent room changes, assistance with accessing emergency housing, assistance with accessing legal services, assisting getting connected to medical or mental health resources, assistance in applying for crime victim compensation program benefits, assistance in applying for the address confidentiality program, support during any campus process. Beneath reads schedule online at psuwrc.youcanbook.me. Visit pdx.edu/WRC or call 503-894-7982. Thanks for listening. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Welcome to our second conversation in our series on creating feminist futures, Black feminism. We're really excited to have with us Ebony Oldham and Naima Lowe. And this should be a really great conversation. I would like to first take an opportunity to do a land acknowledgement. Portland State University is located in the heart of downtown Portland in Multnomah County. We honor the Indigenous people whose lands we occupy. The Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of the Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many and other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We thank the descendants of these tribes for being the original protectors and stewards of this land since time immemorial. We also acknowledge that Portland, Oregon has the 9th largest urban Native American population in the US with over 380 federally recognized tribes represented in the urban Portland metropolitan area. We also acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous and Native American families today. It is important to always remember that colonialism is a current, ongoing process, not only a historical artifact. We are honored by the collective work of many Native nations, leaders, and families who are and have always demonstrated resilience, resistance, revitalization, healing, and creativity. We are honored to be guests upon these lands. We also shoulder the burden of responsibility to make sure our university meaningfully includes Indigenous students and supports making education relevant to their lives. To look up whose land you stand on, go to the website https:// native land.ca/ to see an interactive timeline of major historical events in the United States from an Indigenous perspective, please visit nativephilanthropy.candid.org/timeline. The timelines includes historical traumatic events, settler colonial policies, and Native resistance movements. And now I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. First, Ebony Oldham, who I might add is also a former employee at the Women's Resource Center. Ebony She-They is an artist, organizer of more than 10 years, and a doctoral student at the University of California, Los Angeles in the Department of Gender Studies with scholarly interests in Black leisure and labor studies, Black interiority, Black feminisms, and Black performance studies, mostly at the intersections of Blackness, fatness, and gender. Ebony most recently curated the second annual Black Feminist Summer School, hosted as a love offering in honor of their late grandmother, called the Black Feminist Kitchen. An emerging working group of activists, artists, organizers, and scholars invested in Black feminist interiority. Prior to moving to Los Angeles, Ebony most recently spent 2 years in Columbus, Ohio, in the Department of African American and African Studies, just before transitioning out of her role as a founding member and core organizer for Black Lives Matter Portland chapter, All African People's Revolutionary Party, and as a member of the Global Black Lives Matter Network strategy table. Recently, Ebony was named as one of the 53 most influential women in films, past and present, from Oregon and tribal nations by the Women's Foundation of Oregon. Beyond their ties to community and scholarship, Ebony is an editor and writer at Hood Communists, enjoys watermelon during all seasons, wearing prints with streetwear, and all Black feminist witchy things. Welcome, Ebony Oldham. And we also have with us Naima Lowe, born 1979, Middletown, Connecticut, USA. Naima Lowe, she, her, comes from a long line of Black people who make things. She got parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents who are musicians, fashion designers, teachers, waitresses, and farm laborers. She's steeped in a lineage of Black cultural production characterized by alchemic survival strategies known as collaboration and improvisation. Naima has exhibited videos, performances, and installations at Anthology Film Archive, Wing Luke Museum, Mixed Experimental Film Festival, Jack Straw Cultural Center, Judson Church, and Seattle Contemporary Arts. Her BA is from Brown University, MFA from Temple University, and she's been part of various residencies, including the Malay Colony, Vermont Studio Center, and Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts. Yeah. So, welcome, Naima.
Hello. Hi, y'all.
Hey Naima,
Hey, Ebony. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
No, I'm tired, but
I feel
that's
that.
that's the way we're living. That's the way we're all living. Uh, do you just want to jump on in with what we talked about?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Um, so Ebony and I decided to organize or sort of self-organize our participation in this through the lens of curiosity, and to sort of take the opportunity to say, what one element of a future that I'm really interested in imagining is one where two Black feminists who maybe, are in each other's orbits but don't really know each other have an opportunity
Mm,
to engage each other's work through the spirit of curiosity, um, and
mm,
through a, a lens that is about, is oriented towards service and the things that we're able to provide the world and ourselves, um, but also kind of having faith in the idea that like our curiosities are exciting and compelling in and of themselves. And so that's kind of where we went and decided that we would each take a little bit of time to just like talk about our work, and some of the ways that we see maybe current projects, um, uh, in relationship to Black feminism, um, and then ask each other some questions about the things that we do and how they operate, and then give y'all the opportunity to do the same, um, which I believe our hosts, thank you very much for having us, Women's Resource Center, will sort of field questions through the chat, and time permitting, we'll answer some of them towards the end. Um, so do you want to go first, Ebony? Do you want to kind of talk through?
sure. Yeah. So, hi. My name is Ebony Oldham. I use they, them, theirs pronouns and she, her pronouns. And I would just like to acknowledge the ASL interpreter, Kaylin, who I've had the distinguished pleasure of working with personally during the Black Feminist Summer School 2020. So, I think for me, what kind of comes to mind when I think about curiosity, and those who I'm in community with, this won't be new to you, but I think my curiosity stems um, from really observing and watching my grandmother, which a lot of my work right now kind of tends to. So I usually tell this story, and I'll tell again about how my grandmother used to stare outside the kitchen window for hours at a time, and I used to think it was so odd, so strange. Um, and I used to ask my grandmother, "Why are you staring outside of the kitchen window when, to my eyes, to my height, there was nothing there. I couldn't see anything." Um, our backyard wasn't spectacular, pretty mundane, pretty gray, pretty brown. As often sometimes people of color's neighborhoods are um, in urban areas. And so I, continue to ask this question to my grandmother as a curious kid. And then, as I got older, I noticed that um, her answer to the question changed. So initially she would say, "Oh, I'm not staring at anything." Or sometimes she would say what she's staring at. But I think for me, what I gathered, and this is like my sort of understanding of my grandmother, is that it wasn't what was exactly in front of me that I should have been paying attention to. I noticed over time that my grandmother, who I perceived as looking outside the window, was actually spending intimate time with herself. Actually, sort of, when I look on to my grandmother and see now in retrospect, strategizing about how to maintain a household a bustling household with like children and loved ones coming out, because my grandmother's house was a house in which, you could come and kind of get what you needed, get the care you needed, whether that was food, shelter. Um, and so I think that taught me about the practice of slowing down and to notice Black women, not just when they're dynamic, but in the everyday. And so I think a lot of how I think about my work now um, really sort of centers that practice, the practice of slowing down and paying attention, again, not to things that are dynamic, but perhaps how Black women show up in the everyday. And maybe that is dynamic, but yeah, my work, I think, is disinterested in that. So, all that to say, and I hope this is making sense. All that to say, I I'm really, really fascinated with Black people in the everyday, because I think so much of the worlds that I come from, which is now academia, the worlds rather that I frequent in, so much of that world is very heady and very like meta, and I think that uh, I think maybe it's a practice of trying to stay grounded, but I try to, as much as I possibly can, which I do think um, is a practice of Black feminisms, is to stay rooted in the everyday. So in that way, I think about leisure a lot as sort of working against uh, the project of capitalism that requires gendered labor, Black gendered labor, um, among others. So I think about leisure and Black leisure and how that operates as a slowdown in a sense of Black um, bodies that are relegated to the workforce. And so I look at Black people laying down. Particularly, I think about Black fat people and what um, I think about fatness, leisure, and Blackness in conversation with each other, and think about in particular what Black fat subjecthood um, offers us about fatness, Blackness, um, but just Black being in general. So, all that to say, again, I'm just really fascinated and think a lot in my work about just Black people being. I think I was telling a friend not too long ago that I was really curious about what happens to Black older men who are widowed. Like, I feel like they're absented. We don't really think about our elders. We only think about them. I'm not saying it's a general statement, so I'm not talking about all of us. I think that like those of us who come from Indigenous and Black communities and communities of color think differently about and have different relationships with our elders. But I think oftentimes, even still, our elders are regarded as only as only as useful as they can provide something to us as fact portals about history, but we don't really sort of think about them otherwise. We don't think about being in friendship with our elders. Like that's something that's possible. We only see our relationship to elders as something that we can glean from them. And so just using that as an example, thinking about, well, what happens to like Black older men? Like, why don't we think about them? Or Black women who are elders, like what happens to them beyond their usefulness, especially in social justice movements, to be um, useful or to shape our politics? What happens to so many of our Black elders who have shaped and still continue to shape our movements, who don't have houses, who don't have food, who don't have the care that they need to survive, though they've lended so much labor and thought and care and beauty to what we know this world to be. So, I mean, I try to think about Black people in the everyday, because I think that when Black people are in such proximity to death, that there is a kind of that there is a kind of uh, there is a kind of attention that I think needs to be paid to Black living. So, um, in my own way, I um, um, have curated the Black Feminist Kitchen as an ode to thinking about Black interiority and Black gathering in the everyday. What does it mean to gather with each other and gather in the name of Black feminisms, which is something I believe to be so desperately needed in our movements for so called justice or liberation? And oh, gee, I was going to say something else. What was that? Um, hmm, give me a moment. Um, do, 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 do. You know, I can't remember. But, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Um, oh, yeah. So that's kind of how I see that space and the need for those spaces is to continue to create those spaces where folks can just sort of be together, not only in creating, not only in doing, not only in engaging in political education, which I think is super important as like one of the main components of the Black Feminist Kitchen, but just to be with each other. And I think that hopefully those who were able to attend the summer school noticed the care that we took in being with each other while we were online together in this space at this time that feels so fraught and hard and unknown for all of us. Um, but I think, yeah, I think that there is power in Black gathering because, um, ever since, enslavement for Black people gathering, it has meant the threat of rebellion. And, can't be mad at that. So I hope that was helpful into thinking about how I think about my own work in relationship to curiosity, but also my specific interest in Blackness, fatness, gender, and also leisure and labor. So, Naima, for you, how would you describe your work? How would you introduce your work to all of us?
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to do something which I know people do all the time, but for me seems crazy, which is I'm going to share a
Go for it.
screen. Oh no, I'm new. Okay, where is it?
Do you need help? There should be an arrow in the center of the screen. It's usually green. And if you click that, it should say share screen. And then the left corner, I think if you click on one of those boxes, you double click, it should allow you to share your screen with all of us. But
What's happening is that slide the virtual background. It's not, I was doing this before. Hey tech folks, I was doing this before through my own Zoom and was able to share, but it's not showing me my my specific desktop here.
And that's, you're hitting the green share screen button on the middle of the.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Let's see, let me try this, see if there's a setting I need to do.
It might have you opened up this file already? Sometimes it helps if it's already open and then you hit share screen and you can choose which one you want to share.
1 second, sorry about this, folks. Let's try this.
Life, can you make Naima a co-host?
I think I've got it now. I think I've got it figured
There we go.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to talk a bit about my work. I appreciated Ebony, hearing you talk specifically about the issue of interiority and laying down, I talk a lot to when people ask me about like what's been happening in my life in the last few years and also how I'm doing in this particular moment. And I say that like I've been training for this moment to like stay home and lay down for the last few years. In part because, you know, I'm an artist primarily. I worked in academia for about 10 years, taught at the Evergreen State College, and had a whole big racist clusterfuck come in and try to mess up my whole life. That ended with me leaving my job and meaning that I had to kind of completely kind of upend, you know, how I sort of shaped my living up until that point, right? And so that ended in 2017. And then when I managed to get like a settlement from dealing with this kind of racist abuse that I encountered from the university, and then spent what I call 2018, the year I laid down, right? It's like, what'd you do in 2018? Well, mostly I laid down in service of me trying to kind of do some of the introspection that you were describing relative to your grandmother and to just some of your interests, and really taking an opportunity to say, you know, what is it to have sort of like been pushed off of a particular version of this capitalist treadmill and get a little bit of a restart, right? So it's like, I was the person who like, I went to grad school, I had a bunch of debt, I became a professor, I did the things. Then all of that kind of blew up in a really horrible way. But one of the things that was kind of great was that I like paid off all my loans and didn't have debt and had a totally just had a chance to kind of have my midlife crisis actually give me a chance to restart what I was doing, kind of rethink my priorities. And a lot of those priorities went towards, you know, my art practice, but more specifically sort of how I was taking care of my body, my relationships, my sort of ongoing life. And in so doing, you know, left where I was living, focused a lot more of my attention on, you know, ways that I could go about like making art every single day. Worked on a lot of different projects. And in the process of me trying to think about, you know, how I would describe myself relative to my artwork, relative to being to Black feminism and to whatever the future is supposed to be. I think a lot about Black feminism and feminism in general as like a practice, a set of practices and habits and methodologies. Like I'm an artist, so I do things, I make things. You know, when there is a fair amount of labor in what I do in a lot of relationship to all kinds of different labor in the making of stuff, and the making of objects, the making of films, making of poetry, all kinds of things. And some of the content is, I guess, Black feminist in the sense of addressing questions of liberation and gender parity or equity and identity, certainly, and, you know, issues of kind of what it means to like live at, you know, different intersections of identity. But I also think a lot about the how. You know, I learned a lot of how to work from, you know, people who might not call themselves Black feminists, but I think are my parents, you know, who are really invested in sort of like, you know, my father is a jazz musician. He has taught me a ton about improvisation as like as a survival practice, as this practice of figuring out how to be both your fullest, biggest self and work in as an individual and work towards the sort of betterment and sort of actualization of the collective. That would be like probably from his perspective, some of the most like basic way to sort of describe a sort of improvisational practice. So collaboration is at the core of so much of what I do, and sort of being in the discomfort of what it means to have an individual identity and a collective identity, and to be one person, but also be of history, right? Like these are things that to me are very like deeply felt Black feminist concerns. And I also think of, you know, my mother, who spent a lot of her time attending to making our lives run and making our sort of home and day-to-day life beautiful, and to creating, but also putting a lot of work into the connections that occur within our family and sort of building its capacity over time. And continues to do that. And you know, both of my, you know, parents in their 70s are, you know, in their quote retirements, because I feel like a lot of Black people, like, we don't retire, we just work and then drop dead, but in their retirement are both like, we're making art. That's what we're doing. We're continuing to be creative. My mom started like a fashion label. My dad's continuing.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, she makes very,
awesome.
very like high-end Black, fat fashion.
Oh yeah, I'm there. I need to, you know, hook up with your mom so I can do
I will tell JTL Design. Yes. And so, you know, between the two of them, I've also felt really inspired around sort of like, okay, if part of the goal is to sort of like extend my creativity, you know, as far as possible, and to think of myself as like, you know, having my own goals and sort of participating in these like sort of larger, you know, movements for change, and also participating in my family and my, you know, communities around me. A lot of what that meant for years was through teaching. You know, I taught film and video, which are inherently collaborative forms. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to sort of support students in kind of the creation of their own intellectual lives, in ways that were both, you know, productive and exciting and compelling, but also giving, you know, helping people gain the kind of capacity to deal with discomfort and to take risks and to, you know, empathize with others. And that's a lot of how I saw my work. And even when I stopped teaching, because I was still doing all these massive collaborative projects, I was thinking a lot along those lines. And then in the last, you know, 6-8 months, there was this sort of radical shift. So let me pause for a bit and just show you just sort of a couple of things that maybe demonstrate some of the collaborative work. I'm not going to show the videos that go with anything, but I'm going to just sort of draw your attention to some of the still images and what they're about. So this piece, called Aren't They All Just Love Songs Anyway? There's a couple of stills here from the work. So to describe here, part of what's on the top of the screen, this is my website, it's white background, has my name and a bunch of headers across the top in Black. And then the first image is of a person, you know, with their eyes closed, passionately singing. And with the word gospel underneath. And if you go to the next slide, under that, you see that this person's video is actually of a series of videos, because the next image is of 5 different screens. And on each screen is a person who's also like wearing headphones and singing, or in different stages of this sort of passionate song. And the last 2 images are kind of repeats of the first 2, but from different angles. And this piece was this massive kind of collaborative endeavor, right? I reached out to my father and other people in my life to sort of think about ways I could approach the question of what is kind of collaboration, improvisation, and Black music. How is Black music a part of this sort of broad, generalized lexicon of what's like available in popular culture, and how does it get defined, and who defines it, and what does that mean? And the way that I went about it was I would ask people I knew to pick a song by a Black artist that they love, and then they would sing it for me in front of the camera. And they would sing. I would record them with a lot of like sort of closeness and intimacy. But the videos that I ended up making didn't include their actual singing voices. I then commissioned my father, another musician that we work with quite a bit, to compose original music that was based on some kind of theme or question or interest that was in the original piece, and to kind of expand on it in some way because through the performance that we did. And it was a lot of fun. And they had to compose for, an ensemble that included the likes of me, who is not a musician. And we created a lot of really fun, exciting music out of it. And it was, many, many stages and many, many people, and a lot of my job. We made, I think 7 different videos, and, we did recordings. There's probably an EP coming out. There's like, there was performances that we recorded that were part of like big workshops with, 20, 25 people in them. And, so it was a lot of like people being together, engaging with this music. It was a lot about sort of witnessing an intergenerational kind of conversation about Blackness and art and what was possible. And it was pretty much my favorite thing ever. And something I could happily do, for the rest of my life as an artist. But it also involved, a lot of travel, a lot of people in rooms together singing and doing all kinds of things that COVID just put, a huge halt to. And in a kind of indefinite way, like we don't know what's coming next with it, although I hope that, we'll get to the next stage of it when we can. I'm giving this as an example because for me, this was a kind of project where like, I would argue there's stuff that's content to it that has a specific sort of feminist framework. But to me, the feminist impulse that's in it is the methodology, right? That I was like, this is uncomfortable. This is talking about a conversation about who gets to say what Black music is, which then means who gets to say what Black is, which then means who doesn't get to say it. And then it's also about creativity. And then it's also about, sort of historical relationships to music and all kinds of stuff. And to me, a huge part of that like feminist praxis is like creating a container in which that kind of conversation and that kind of collaboration across sort of generations and modes is possible. And then, like I said, all of a sudden wasn't able to do that as much. One of the things that I ended up doing as an alternative I'll also say about that work, it was also very intentionally about caring for my desire to have, care and proximity with my dad, who is an old Black man. I often wonder what he's doing. I often am concerned about it, like I'm and wanting to be in proximity and be, close with and hear from and be friends with, and a desire to sort of share some of the things around that relationship and others in my family, more broadly in my communities, et cetera. Then when COVID hit and it seemed like, that project was going to kind of come to a screeching halt, even though that had been a huge part of the last, sort of 2 years of my working, I made this huge pivot towards another area of my work, which had been kind of quiet and in the background, which was painting and drawing. And this, I'm going to show, so this is a page that I've come to that has some different thumbnails of drawings from sort of from when seeing them all together, you see a lot of shades of pink, a lot of black lines, a lot of sort of topographic and kind of biomorphic forms. I'll click us through a few of them. This one's one of my favorites. And they all just have names like quarantine studies number, whatever. I think this is number 17. And it's, you know, a sort of pink and coral background, a form that kind of, I don't know, I think it sort of looks sort of like a combination between a continent and like a zit and like a body sort of in motion, and has a lot of layering. And I spent a lot of time sort of developing kind of this visual language that includes this really, really dense color scheme with a lot of pink and gold, and creating these forms that would sort of come together and move apart. So in this one, this is a theme that's pretty consistent of these like sort of two connected forms, sort of these kind of blobs, or maybe they're continents, or maybe they're ovaries, or maybe they're people. Depending on the day, I'll tell you a different story about what they are. And I started making these in earnest during the at the beginning of the pandemic, because I was like, I think my main job right now, if I'm going to remain well, and if I'm going to remain available to myself and to the people around me, is, you know, I got to just like keep my brain intact. I got to care for my interiority. I have to be okay. And this type of drawing is very effective with that for me. Like it soothes me. You know, if there is a way that I could make my living by just spending 4 hours a day or more doing this, I would. And yeah, so this is a series of drawings that's main job, even though, you know, there's a lot of sort of formal things that I'm taking on with it and questions I'm asking, but its main job was to take care of me, right? Like its main job was to keep me emotionally, spiritually, psychologically well. And to my surprise, as I started sort of sharing some of them kind of tangentially, like on Instagram, was that people responded to them and found them engaging. So I'm opening one now that has a pretty bright pink background. There's again these kind of like lines and blobs within them. There's this kind of abstract forms with a lot of gold coloring within it. And here's another that was sort of more of just a line study rather than dense paint the way the other ones were. And I, you know, work a lot with texture and kind of trying to kind of map and understand. You know, I started to kind of think about these as almost like a rigorous documentation of my own imagination, right? Where there's just like a series of like images and ideas that are kind of on repeat in my head. And that my job at this point is to just try to document them as well as possible. And I started to sort of imagine, so, you know, I was making these pieces, feeling very interested in them, was really tickled to see that other people are also interested in them. And also ran into the challenge of another sort of institutional hiccup vis-a-vis racism. Turns out being Black and a woman and having a big mouth about people's poor management doesn't keep you jobs, or fellowships, which is what I had at the time. And so then, and I left the one that I was in. And so in addition to, you know, this need to take care of myself in a sort of spiritual way, I also had a need to take care of myself in the sense of making rent. And for the first time in a while, I had to think about, you know, my art practice through like an explicitly commercial lens, which was initially really, really daunting and horrible and felt like crap. And now I've kind of gotten over myself and just sort of, you know, have this kind of relationship and sense of like, I could criticize I do spend a lot of time criticizing capitalism all day long. And also I have to live through it like everybody else. And so here I am, being a small business owner, I guess, which in itself has been an interesting process because, you know, I was like, I'm never going back to academia. Apparently artist fellowships are also kind of a challenge. And so now there's this whole other sort of relationship to my creativity as commodity that I thought would feel a lot more difficult than it turns out to. There's actually something kind of pleasing about how straightforward it is. As opposed to the sort of gesticulations that we make within, you know, being on, I mean, you know this, I mean, you're on the job market, your ideas, your intellectual life, all of your time are considered like owned by the institution, and in some ways literally owned by the institution, your intellectual property, all kinds of stuff. There is something nice to me about being like, person who purchases Quarantine Studies number 20, you get exactly $397 of my life, and that is it. Right? And it's straightforward. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But it's become a kind of project of my life to kind of think about what it would mean for my artwork to take care of me, but also to literally take care of me. From a practical standpoint, from a, you know, in my mind standpoint. Yeah, I think that's where I'll pause for the time being. Those are kind of the major things. Oh, I also started doing a lot of print work in ways that I hadn't before. So part of doing all of this, like drawing and being really kind of attentive to my own mind and my interiority, has meant that when I do have a moment where I feel like a necessity to act and create something, I feel a sense of kind of nimbleness towards making it that I didn't before. When I was sort of more beholden to these sort of larger institutional structures. And so one of the ways that kind of came across was I made this project called Anthem, in which I made a series of like printed works around just the concept and question and reality of an abolitionist politic. And so what's on the screen here is the term anthem, and then a few different lines with links under them. So the first one is, the police don't make us safer. And if you link to that, you know, it gives us to, you know, Marian Kaba's now sort of well-known article about, yes, we literally mean abolish the police, right? And then I have other kind of links to information about and sort of descriptions of what I mean and what concepts of abolition means and how it functions. And then a whole bunch of work. So posters or screen print posters, stickers, tote bag, and some smaller 2 different sizes posters, all featuring the term "fuck the police" in very sort of neat longhand, bright pink, with some of the proceeds going to various organizations, and all of the sort of, my hope for this project was to sort of have a way of engaging with abolition in a way that was both very straightforward, and also embrace the part of it that is also extraordinarily derived from like fem and feminist understanding of what care means, right? So that care isn't about punishment, care isn't about throwing people away, care is about, you know, this capacity to create sort of systems outside of cops and prisons. And so I wanted to honor that by making it as like, kind of like an ode to like, basically all the people who taught me about those things the most, which is like, you know, femmes, sex workers, my mom, right? Like all people where this like brightness and this gaudiness and this loudness and this sweetness of pink are really important. So, and also to have a way that you can sort of engage with some of the ideas that kind of come behind it. So, you know, some of the links kind of give us, you know, ways through to Aid to Abolition or to Project Nia or to other kind of articulations of what abolition means. And so, and this came to me, you know, pretty fast. I went from like, maybe I'll do this to, you know, like in a kind of explosion of work, because I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. If y'all remember, in June of this year, so around Pride and around Juneteenth, our like president decided to come hold a rally. I was like, diseased racists are like descending on my head, right? Like I need to have a response, and this was mine. And I think that I don't know if I can't say how I would have responded otherwise, but I do think that some of the practice that I was in of being so attentive to caring for myself, but also of my sort of in the insides of my mind and imagination and my color sense and my drawing and everything, I think I would have found it a lot harder to go from, you know, I think I came up with this idea around June 3rd, right? Because we're sort of right in the midst of George Floyd protests, and then had it all printed and ready to go by the 18th, with the website and everything else kind of behind it, because I felt it gave me a lot of readiness and room that could occur because I actually had time to myself to engage. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there because I could go on and on about what this is and the relationship between it and what I think about commerce and abolition and a whole bunch of other stuff. But wanted to sort of share those two projects, the drawing studies, this study, and then also these prints. There's a more recent set of prints that I'm doing in support of the Tulsa, Oklahoma chapter of the Bail Project. I found out recently that Oklahoma has the largest per capita incarcerated people in the world. A huge part of the economy here is all based on like bail and incarceration fees and all that kind of stuff. And so again, there was like a lot of conversation sort of happening here about the election and about sort of how we can or can't kind of engage in those politics. And this was a way for me to kind of think about that work, support some work in my community that I really respect, and also kind of think about ways that I can share some of these kind of visual lexicon that I've been creating through these prints. So these ones, there's a one sort of abstract one.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to do a time check.
Oh yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'll stop there, and yeah, we can go into some of our questions if they exist. So yeah, Ebony, I'm wondering if you had, well, I had questions for you. I wonder if you had questions for me, because I've been kind of rattling off for a while.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I have some questions for you, but maybe you could pose yours to me and then I could pose mine to you.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. The questions I had for you had to do with how do you feel like the Black Feminist Kitchen kind of changed and changed from a physical gathering to a virtual gathering? And do you feel like it's sort of meaning sort of shifted over time? Maybe meaning isn't the right word, but like it's type of impact, because I know you've done it for a couple of years now.
Yeah, so I think, let's see. I think that, yeah, originally it started in Portland, where I'm from, and it happened actually at the Women's Resource Center, and there were about maybe 50 to 60 participants. And obviously, due to the global pandemic, we had to move the space online. Well, we didn't have to, but I thought about it. I thought about what it could look like to move the space online, and was feeling very convicted about moving it online because there's, so much going on, but ultimately felt like if it was a space that people wanted to be in, perhaps it should exist. And for those who could not make it this time around, that was okay too. So I think in terms of how things change, and it being an in-person gathering to the online space is, I mean, I think that it required us to be more um, attentive to the needs that we should have already been um, attending to, right? I think sometimes, um, when, I think that, so, well, let me back up. I do think like that slowing down process is helpful and useful. And I feel like I notice that often in my work. And I think in a way, moving online allowed for there to be, I think the stakes were higher considering that it was gaining a lot of like uh, public traction. But I also think that also working with like 16 other people that I brought on to help me think through this, just made it more possible to think about moving the space online more expansively, and one that considered all of us. And um, I definitely believe and know a Black feminist practice to be like about including all of us and not leaving folks out. And so, all that to say, I think that it changed in terms of requiring that we were more intentional and rigorous about what we were building. And it also changed in that we were grieving loss from physical presence, from the ways that those who attended prior knew it to exist that didn't exist anymore. And at the same time, I feel like something new emerges when you offer something in a different way. And I think that for me, what made the most sense is just grappling with that loss of not being able to hug, touch with consent, of course, and be in physical space with other people. So again, grappling with that loss, but also acknowledging that maybe it doesn't need to happen in the same way, and that's okay. Maybe we can tend to loss, and maybe that losing of the physical space offers another way to think about what couldn't have existed otherwise, if that makes sense. So I would say that's how um, I feel like those spaces change over time. Yeah.
I wonder if do you think that your practice around, you spoke about this a little bit, but do you think that your practice and your interests around leisure and gathering and space making and you didn't use the term stillness, but that's what I interpreted. Do you think that those have like become, were those specifically responses to your working within academia? And if so, how?
So, uh, so are you asking if me coming to like stillness and stillness is if that was derived in the academy?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what I'm curious about.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I don't think that it was. I think that like the experiences that I'm naming, I think directly come from like the lived experience of my grandmother, who I, bore witness to as a child. I think that my grandmother, um, and not just my grandmother, other Black people, particularly Black women, are the spaces in which I feel like I learned stillness. And another story about my grandmother, I used to lose my wallet constantly as a youth. And I mean, like constantly. I mean, like constantly, very irresponsible. I don't know what it was. I would just sit my very like anti-black insofar as Black people don't do that. They don't sit their like purse or their personal belongings on the ground. Like it's a no-no. Like I don't know how. Like I don't know that aspect of being raised, but like apparently I was wild out here in these streets and just like sitting shit down and leaving it everywhere. And my grandmother constantly say, I mean, I heard it over and over again and still, it did not resonate until now, but she would constantly say, you have to slow down. Like you just have to slow down. And then one time I went to Seattle, which is, not too far away from Portland. And I went to the, what is it called? The market. I forgot what the market's called. But I found this stone that said slow down. And so now in respect of my grandmother and in remembrance of her, I sleep with it under my pillow, but it's just a stone that is engraved with slow down. So I think that, that taught me about the practice of being still, of taking a moment to oneself. And I think that and in some ways, obviously this moment for all of us, but not for all, but in this moment for all of us has required that we be still, but at the same time, I do want to be mindful that everyone doesn't have the same subject position, everyone doesn't have the same circumstances, and in fact, maybe things haven't slowed down for them. But I do think that stillness is a part of um, a Black feminist practice that, knows just when you need to slow it down, just knows exactly when you need to just be um, and not move on something. I think about it in the ways that I've now welcomed in my life, like not being super polished, making sure I take time to be like, can I just have a moment? Can I think about this? Can I process this? Or when I'm triggered or when I feel like something's coming up for me and it doesn't feel like, or it feels like my body is responding to something that my words perhaps don't want to, I take moments to be like, I just need to be with myself. I just need to be still for a second. And, I think that stillness invites understanding. And I think that stillness, a Black feminist practice of stillness is inherently, you know, um, contrary to capitalism that requires fastness, that requires that we don't be still, that requires that we're reckless, that requires that we're fast paced at all costs at the expense of so many people, so many things, so many ways of being in the world. So I would definitely say that stillness um, is it's not just to me it's not just a feminist practice. I think it's a Black feminist practice, and I think it's a Black feminist practice because I think that there's something that is there's something that has been tied, I think, to Black people's how do I say um position in a way where strategy out of unfortunate circumstances due to anti-Blackness has required that stillness must be present as a practice of strategy, if that makes any kind of sense. Um, which I also think in the spirit of talking about abolition is a practice of abolition. It's taking notice. It's not, going out into the streets haphazardly, or maybe it's showing up in the streets because like that's the way that we need to show up at this time, this moment, but knowing that perhaps, that might not be a long-term strategy, or maybe different, different circumstances require different strategies. It, might require being still and taking a moment to reflect and see what's in front of us or even what's behind us, and how those things are in conversation with each other. I know I feel very like rosy and meta right now, but hopefully I'm adding some sort of substance to how I think about stillness. But yeah, I actually have these like Black feminist tool cards, and it's stillness is one of my tool cards, along with like the practice of being undone, uh, noticing, being, raging, bittersweetness. I can't think of the others, but yeah. So thank you for that question. I really deeply appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like you answered in that answer my other questions, which kind of had to do
Probably.
with, no, which is great. It's really better to just hear it from you, but had to do with like, yeah, different kinds of practices, and having a relationship to one's um, own mind, and being attentive to it as like this really important critical tool that I agree with you gets like undervalued in a lot of spaces. So yeah, that was sort of my next space, and you talked about it really beautifully there. So yeah. Do you feel like there is a could you talk a little bit more about your research in terms of questions of like Black people and the everyday? Like how are you kind of engaging with that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm still working through that, but I think about Black people in the everyday a lot in the relationship to violence, but I'm trying to um think about Black people in the everyday and in other ways too. So maybe I'll address them both. And the ways that I think about Black people in the everyday, I think um, it's it's useful to think about Black people. It's kind of impossible to think about Black people outside of their relationship to violence, but I think it's necessary. So my work prompts me to think about how Black people in the everyday experience violence at sites of leisure, because it's like my interest. So I think about things a lot spatially. And so here's an example of something that I think about. Um, I think about Sandra Bland and how she was driving in the car and gets pulled over after really being followed. Um, and how Breonna Taylor was asleep in her home, and so many other instances of like racial terror directed at Black people at sites of leisure. But in this particular instance with Sandra Bland, I think about how her exchange with former Texas State Trooper Brian Encinia kind of reveals how the process of like civilizing the slave is not a process of the past. It's one that exists, and perhaps through policing. But I also think about how oftentimes when we think about the colonial project of civilizing the slave or civilizing, the savage native, we often think about it only as a process of racialization, but also it's a process of gendering through racialization. So I think about Sandra Bland and her and Insidia and asking her these three questions, one of which, can you put out your cigarette? And because he doesn't, like her response, she's not really performing the ways that she should be responding to white male authority. she, you know, she asserts herself, she knows her rights, she's, you know, been involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, speaking up on social media, right? So he notices that, and then in my work and what I read, what happens to Black women, on folks who are ruled as unruly Black women, they are they experience like gratuitous violence. They experience violence as the practice of civilizing the slave. So like I think in some way you can't ever really think about um, you can't really get too far without thinking about how even sites of Black being together with each other is policed at the same time. I think that there are so many other ways that we have to attend to Black living, because there are Black folks living, right, in the ways that we gather over each other's house, in the ways that we share space with each other, we share food, we share friendship, we share connection, we share, you know, anger, we share all the things. And so in this other part of my work, I think about how important that is. And I think about, you know, the intimacy between, you know, Black people doing each other's hair, and the conversation that's exchanged in those moments. You know, I think about how food allows Black people to gather, and in those moments I think often about, and like some of my earlier work, I was super interested in like the performance of the head nod. I think about those moments where Black people encounter each other on the street and are gesturing towards this head nod, this sort of I see you, especially right in a place like Portland, Oregon, that's you know, really really white, and where there's a particular, you know, history of, you know, anti-Blackness in the state. I think about those moments, those glimpses even. So I mean, I think that um, I think that those moments are possible, because I think they're possible. I think that they're important rather, and I think that I'm interested in thinking more about Black living, because I think I don't know. I don't know if I think that. I was going to say something like I don't know if I still think that. I don't know. I think they both are. Um, I think that they're both sites of knowledge. I think Black suffering allows a kind of knowing about the world that one wouldn't otherwise know. But I also think that Black living is knowledge that, you know, we can tap into to provide intel. And I think both are are both can be, I guess, opportunities to reconcile and shape shift what we think about the future.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure where we're at with time, but I definitely wanted to pose a question to you if possible.
Love it.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed you talking about your father and your mother, and how your relationship to them, and what you noticed about them is also a part of how you think about your work and your art practice. And I was specifically interested in, let me get my cheat sheet out here. Well, I guess you kind of answered that. Okay. Let's see. You also mentioned about like improv, and also like I was reading your artist statement about the unknown. Can you tell us more about how that space feels like a space you can work from, right? When we're taught that the unknown is scary, like for you, that seems like a point in which you actually like you invite the unknown, and you welcome what it offers us. And so can you tell me and others more about um, how you got to that place, or how you again kind of see this
Right.
unknown?
Yeah, I mean, I see it. I think that having a strong relationship to the unknown is critical, and it requires discipline, right? Like, in order to be ready to respond to anything, you have to be ready, right? You have to have, and I don't mean discipline in the like in somebody else's response. It's like whatever I do well, like right now, what I do well apparently is spend a lot of time thinking about the color pink, right? I think pink, I draw pink, I talk about pink. You ask me a question about pink, I can tell you, right? So that's my jam, right? And so when it's time, I'm like, all right, here we go, pink. That's what I got. And I can give it to you with as much like energy and care and commitment as possible. And have a willingness to mess up in the process, but still be willing to like take that step. And I think that I've learned that through, you know, having like, I appreciated what you said about sort of relationships to suffering, but also to surviving, right? I think, you know, I have parents who have a, a lot of experience with having to be really responsive to a complicated, difficult world, and are really good at it, and who practice it in very, you know, visible, sort of acknowledged ways, like as a musician, right? My father's like make, you know, practice, so that when it's time to get together, you know, we can play. But also as, you know, just like working class Black people, my part of the reason I think of my business sort of orientation now through that lens, where my mom has had as many careers as a lot of people have hairstyle, you know, because she's just like, oh, we got to figure it out. We got to make money. We got to run the house. We got to do the thing, and does so in a way that is about urgency, but is also about pursuing her own like pleasure and curiosity in the process, right? Um, and so to me, it feels like something I've been practicing at, and I think that when I was in academia, it was harder. I was much more sort of like, there's a path, there's a trajectory, there's steps that I'm supposed to take. And when they got interrupted, it was very challenging, but then ultimately was an opportunity to kind of be like, okay, so let me kind of shift gears a little bit. And I think it's like, you know, it's part, being an artist in academia is always kind of weird. It's like, we're there, people kind of, you know, have sort of institutionalized us into that world, but also people kind of don't trust us. Like, I mean that, like, I mean, I think there's all kinds of ways that I, as a Black woman and stuff, isn't trusted, but I think specifically artists is like, there's an aspect of our work that is like rigorous in this mysterious way that people, that we're like, yeah, we don't know how it happens. It just happens. We just, one day we have an idea and we do it. And I remember finding my colleagues being very kind of disturbed by this at times within, and I was like, yeah, that's the unknown, right? Like, that's the magic. That's the piece of creation that even inside the most, you know, institutional boxes is still going to kind of just spill and do what it wants to do. And so now I just think of it as my job, is that like tuning, you know, that's why I like drawing right now. It's tuning my instrument so that when the unknown sort of circumstance that I need to respond to comes up, I have kind of readiness. I don't know if that answers your question. I think we're out, almost out of time. I'm looking. I don't know if that means that there is those last 5 minutes for a question from the audience, or I don't know, diversity people want to give us.
It looks like questions were answered while talking, but we have 4 minutes till the end of the event.
Okay.
I think we might hand it over to Alicia here.
Okay. Cool.
I'm like, y'all don't have to like immediately stop talking.
No, I want to control people's time.
Yes. We just want to thank y'all, first of all, for, I know that you're on East Coast. and a few hours ahead. Thank the both of you, though, for coming and being a part of this conversation on Black feminism. I think, the takeaway is like Black feminism is so expansive, like the ways in which we've encountered it or the ways that it's been introduced to us, right? Don't always account for um, the many ways that it can show up in all of our lives. I mean, from the very practical, right, sense to what you're talking about, like in academia and these different art spaces and organizing spaces. There's a lot that falls outside of and also um, within that vein. So thank you again for giving us a little bit of a glimpse into your work and your lives. Eb, it's always good to see you and bring you back. Thank you, Kaylin, our ASL interpreter, for joining us again. And thanks to Gail, who is our live captioner this evening, providing these opportunities to make these conversations more accessible. So we just wanted to say again, thanks everyone for joining us. We want to remind again any of the folks who are PSU students about some of the programs that we have, opportunities for you to be a part of either the Feminist of Color Community Project. I believe that those meetings are happening on Wednesdays. The Trans Women's Community Project happening on Mondays. Please go to our website, pdx.edu/women's resource center. They changed it up on us. But I think you can still get there by /WRC. We got Naima's website that for y'all to look at. Please go visit and share her work. Black Feminist Kitchen. Oh, we got a .com for the Black Feminist Kitchen as well as an Instagram. All right. Yeah, follow these excellent Black folks who are offering us all the things. Any last words from the two of you? Thanks to WRC staff, Leif, with our IT, our OIT department. Any last words?
Just thanks for having us. It's great to talk and to get to know you, Ebony. It's been fun. Appreciated it.
Yeah, thank you all for having us, and I hope you all take care.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you for the next conversation in our series, which I believe will be our land back conversation on Indigenous feminism. So stay tuned for details on that. We'll have some more excellent speakers. Yes, y'all stay safe. Stay home. Stay safe. For real.
Thanks, everyone.